Hello guys, welcome back to a new part of Android tutorial. In today's episode, we are going to learn about how to communicate two fragments placed on the same activity. It is not possible to communicate two fragments placed on same activity directly. You need some interfaces for establishing a communication between two fragments hosted on the same activity. Here I am going to explain all these concepts using a complete working example. So here I am going to start a new project. So new project is an Android application project. I name it as Fragment Share. Change the package name. You need to specify the minimum record SDK version as 3.0 because Fragment is only available from Android version 3.0. And click next. Again click next. Click next. Create a blank activity. Click next. Here is the activity name and layout name, main activity and activity main.xml file, and finally click finish. Okay, now the IDE creates the projects for us. So here is the layout of the main activity. Now I am going to create two fragments here, and I'm going to place the two fragments on the main activity layout file. So for creating two fragments, expand the resource folder on layout folder. Here I'm going to create layout for the first fragment. So choose other option, create a new Android XML file. I name it as fragment. I name it as fragment 1. I name it as fragment 1 and choose relative layout and click finish. Okay, here we got the layout for the first fragment, which is name it as fragment 1. Now I need to change the background color of these fragments. So open your browser and type HTML color codes. From this website, here I'm going to choose a color code. Okay, I copy this color code and change the background color of this layout file using Android background. Specify a hash symbol and paste that color code here. Now we change the background color of this fragment. Okay, now I change the height of the fragment into 180 density pixel. Okay, change the fragment height. Here I am going to add a large text view on this fragment and change the text of the text view as this is the first fragment. Okay, just create the layout of the first fragment. Now we need to create class file for this first fragment. So go to the src folder. On this package, right click and create a new Java class file. I name it as fragment. I am going to name it as first fragment. Name it as first fragment and click finish. Now we got the class file for the first fragment and extends it with the fragment. Okay, now create an override method called onCreateView, which is a lifecycle method for fragment, and here you need to inflate that layout for this fragment. So for that I create an object of view class. So v is equal to inflator dot inflate. Specify the layout resource for this fragment r.layout dot, which is fragment 1, and specify root. Here the view group object is container, so specify it container, and also there is a third argument called say boolean one. I specify it as false. Now return this view, return view. Okay, now we successfully create the first fragment layout. Now we need to create the second fragment. So on the layout file, create a new fragment, new second fragment. So create a new Android XML file. I name it as fragment 2. I name it as fragment 2. Choose relative layout for it and click finish. Now we got the second fragment. Now I am going to change the background color of this fragment. So go to that website and choose another HTML color code. Okay, I choose another HTML color code. Copy this code and specify it on the layout file. So Android background, and paste that code here. Okay, again here also I am going to change the height into 180 density pixel. 180 density pixel. Here also I am going to place a text view on this layout. Change the text as this is the second fragment. This is the second fragment. Okay, now we need class file for this fragment. So right click the package and create a new Java class. Name it as, here I'm going to name it as second fragment and click finish. Here we got the class file for the second fragment and extends it with the fragment class fragment, and override that fragment lifecycle method on create view. Okay, create the view class object and return that view, and v is equal to inflator dot inflate. Specify the layout resource dot layout dot. Here the second fragment layout is fragment 2, and specify the view group object. Here view group is container, and provide false as third argument. Return that view. Now return that view. Okay, save it. There is some errors. There is a bracket missing. Specify it. Okay. Now we just create the two fragment layout and fragment classes. Now I am going to add the two fragment into the first activity layout. So go to the activity main.xml file. Here I am going to add two relative layout on this. So add a relative layout. Okay, here I'm going to place the first fragment on this relative layout. So we need another relative layout for placing the second fragment. Okay, so provide an ID for the first relative layout. So Android ID equal to plus ID. I name it as first layout. Now specify Android height and width. Android height, it is about 200. I specify it as 200 density pixel, and specify Android layout width. As match parent. Okay. Now I am going to add the, so you can see on the graphical layout, here is the first fragment, here is the first relative layout, and here is the second relative layout. Here is the first relative layout, first layout, and here is the second relative layout. So you need to specify an ID for it also. So copy all these things and paste it here. I name it as second layout. and height is again here also the second layout height is 200 density pixel and width match parent, and I'm going to align below layout below for the first layout. So plus id layout below plus id, going to save it. So place it below the first layout. Okay, now on the graphical layout you can see the two fragment layouts, two relative layouts here. Okay, now I am going to add the first fragment into the first relative layout. So here specify that fragment specify an Android ID first. ID is equal to plus ID. I name it as F1. Specify the layout Android layout with specify it as match parent. Now specify height Android layout height as match parent. Okay. Now specify the class name for the fragment Android name equal to com dot fragment share dot first fragment. That is the class name for the first fragment. Okay. Now we need to place the second fragment on the second relative layout. So copy these things and paste it here. I name the ID as F2. Here the class name is second fragment. I name it as second fragment. Okay. Now we successfully placed the two fragments on the main activity file. Now we can check it before doing further coding on this project. So I just run this project, run as Android application, open up your AVD. Okay, now we got the fragment, we got the two fragment on the main activity. This is the first fragment and this is the second fragment. Now I am going to send some data from the first fragment to the second fragment through the hosted activity, that means the main activity. So we need an interface, we need an interface on the first fragment. So I will explain all these concepts in the next part. Please go to the next part of this tutorial.